The Monday morning sun painted golden streaks across Courtroom 302's mahogany walls as Judge William Hartley adjusted his freshly pressed robes. The familiar weight of the fabric settled on his shoulders, a reminder of the 20 years he'd spent behind this very bench. Today marked the beginning of another busy week at Central Court, though something in the air felt different. Through the towering windows, morning light illuminated the sea of faces filling the wooden benches. Each row held its own stories. A young woman nervously checking her phone, an elderly gentleman meticulously organizing his paperwork, and a row of suited professionals tapping away at their tablets. The quiet murmur of whispered conversations created a gentle hum that echoed off the high ceiling. Sarah Chen, the newly appointed court clerk, approached the bench with a stack of files that seemed to grow taller by the minute. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying a hint of concern. "We have 47 cases on the morning calendar today. That's almost double our usual Monday docket." She placed the files on his desk with practiced precision, each folder aligned perfectly with the edge of the rich wooden surface. Judge Hartley removed his reading glasses from their case, the gold frames catching the sunlight. He'd seen countless Monday mornings like this one, yet experience had taught him that no 2 days in this courtroom were ever truly the same. "Thank you, Ms. Chen," he replied, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had mastered the art of maintaining order. "Let's proceed with the calendar call." The bailiff's voice rang out clear and strong. "All rise. The Superior Court of the 5th Judicial District is now in session, the Honorable Judge William Hartley presiding." The shuffling of feet and rustling of clothing filled the air as the assembled crowd rose in unison. As Judge Hartley took his seat, his eyes swept across the courtroom. The morning calendar consisted primarily of traffic violations, with a sprinkling of minor infractions, the usual fare for a Monday morning. Yet the sheer volume of cases promised to test even his well-honed efficiency. The first few cases moved along smoothly. A red light violation admitted with apology, a stop sign infraction contested with photographic evidence, and a parking dispute resolved through a payment plan. Judge Hartley maintained his trademark pace, firm but fair, as he worked through each case with methodical precision. Court Officer James Martinez moved through the aisles with quiet authority, organizing the defendants into orderly groups based on their citation types. His presence helped maintain the delicate balance between efficiency and proper procedure that Judge Hartley had cultivated over his years on the bench. The wall clock ticked steadily toward 9:15 a.m. as they worked through the calendar. Judge Hartley noticed Ms. Chen discreetly rearranging some files, her expression suggesting another unexpected addition to their already full morning. The sunlight had shifted, creating new patterns on the courtroom floor, and the initial nervous energy of the room had settled into a rhythm of systematic justice. Next case, Judge Hartley called out, his voice carrying the same steady authority it had held since the morning began. He glanced at the upcoming file, noting the straightforward nature of the speeding citation. After 2 decades of presiding over similar cases, he had developed an almost intuitive sense for how each would unfold. Little did he know that the next case would break from the familiar pattern of his Monday morning routine. As he prepared to call the defendant's name, the large wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, sending a subtle ripple through the assembled crowd. The morning was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge his decades of judicial experience in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The creaking of the courtroom doors drew every eye in the room. Marcus Johnson stepped inside with measured grace, his presence somehow both understated and commanding. The leather briefcase in his right hand swayed gently with each step, its well-worn surface telling stories of countless legal battles fought in courtrooms across the state. Judge Hartley's gaze fixed on the late arrival, his expression a careful blend of professional detachment and mild disapproval. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the silver threading in his robe as he straightened in his chair, preparing to address this interruption to his carefully orchestrated morning calendar. Case number 2023 TR 45,892, Sarah Chen announced, her voice carrying clearly through the now hushed courtroom. She glanced at the clock, 9:15 a.m., then back at the new arrival, who was making his way through the gathered crowd with quiet apologies as he passed. Marcus Johnson's charcoal slacks and navy polo shirt stood out among the usual mix of business suits and casual wear that filled the benches. His clothing, while not formal, spoke of careful selection, the kind of deliberate choice that suggested both confidence and respect for the setting. The polo shirt's collar was perfectly pressed, and his shoes, though not new, gleamed with recent care. Court Officer Martinez stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Sir, you're Mr. Johnson?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested recognition, as if trying to place a familiar face in an unexpected context. Johnson nodded, producing his driver's license with a smooth motion that spoke of familiarity with courtroom procedures. The whispers that had accompanied Johnson's entrance faded to silence as he reached the defendant's table. He placed his briefcase on the floor beside him with practiced ease, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room. His movements were unhurried yet precise, each action deliberate and composed. Judge Hartley's fingers drummed a soft rhythm on his desk, a habit he'd developed over years of managing his courtroom's pace. The morning sun had shifted again, casting long shadows across the judge's bench, adding gravity to his already stern expression. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for those who disturbed his courtroom's careful choreography, "you were scheduled for 9:00 a.m. Johnson's response came with a calm that seemed to settle over the entire courtroom. "My apologies, Your Honor," he said, his voice rich and clear, carrying to the back of the room without effort. "I understand the value of the court's time." The words were simple, yet they held a weight that suggested deep familiarity with legal proceedings. Sarah Chen busied herself with the case file, but her eyes occasionally darted between the judge and the defendant, sensing the subtle tension building in the air. The other waiting defendants leaned forward slightly, their own cases momentarily forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. The morning light caught Johnson's profile as he stood at attention, revealing features that seemed carved from years of legal experience, laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of wisdom, and a set to his jaw that hinted at unwavering determination. His posture remained perfectly straight, neither defensive nor challenging, but rather radiating a quiet confidence that seemed almost out of place in traffic court. Judge Hartley's years on the bench had taught him to read people quickly, to sort through the usual parade of excuses and attitudes that filled his morning calendar. But something about Johnson's demeanor gave him pause, a subtle detail he couldn't quite place. The judge's fingers ceased their drumming as he studied the man before him, trying to reconcile the late arrival with the composed professional standing at attention. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the judge's next words. The usual Monday morning routine had shifted into something else entirely, though none of the observers could yet guess how this seemingly simple traffic case would unfold into one of the most memorable moments in Courtroom 302's history. Sarah Chen's voice filled the courtroom as she read the citation details into the record. "Your Honor, the citation indicates that on April 15th at 8:45 a.m., the defendant's vehicle, a 2023 silver Mercedes E-Class, was observed traveling at 82 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone on Interstate 95, specifically at marker 147 northbound. The morning sunlight had shifted to create a geometric pattern across the courtroom floor, seeming to spotlight Marcus Johnson as he stood at the defendant's table. His presence continued to command attention, though he appeared completely at ease with the proceedings. Judge Hartley adjusted his reading glasses, studying the citation before him. "Officer Patterson's notes indicate clear weather conditions, light traffic, and that your vehicle was identified using calibrated radar equipment." He looked up, his gaze meeting Johnson's. "How do you wish to proceed with this citation, Mr. Johnson?" The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was almost palpable as Johnson cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying the same measured tone that had marked his earlier apology, "I don't dispute the officer's reading. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathered observers. Direct admissions were rare in traffic court. Johnson continued, his words carefully chosen. I was indeed traveling above the posted speed limit that morning. I was due to attend an urgent meeting regarding a time-sensitive matter. He paused, and for a moment, something flickered across his face, a brief shadow of the weight of responsibilities not spoken of. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Throughout his years on the bench, he'd heard countless variations of the important meeting excuse. Yet something in Johnson's delivery gave him pause. The defendant's stance, his careful choice of words, the way he held himself, all suggested there was more to the story. Officer Martinez, standing near the bench, shifted his weight slightly. His eyes narrowed as he studied Johnson, as if trying to place him in a different context. The morning light caught the badge on his uniform as he unconsciously straightened his posture, responding to something in Johnson's bearing that commanded respect. Mr. Johnson, Judge Hartley leaned forward, his tone carrying years of practiced authority. While I appreciate your honesty regarding the speed recorded, you understand that important meetings are not an exemption to traffic laws. The words were standard, almost routine, but they seemed to take on a different weight in the unusually charged atmosphere of the courtroom. A subtle smile touched the corners of Johnson's mouth, not dismissive, but understanding. Yes, Your Honor. I fully acknowledge that my responsibilities don't place me above the law. I'm simply providing context for my actions, not an excuse for them. Sarah Chen's pen paused mid-note, her attention caught by the unusual exchange. The typical morning shuffle of papers and whispered conversations had completely ceased, as if the entire courtroom was holding its breath, sensing that this was no ordinary traffic case. The silver-framed clock on the wall ticked steadily forward, marking each moment of this increasingly intriguing interaction. Sunlight glinted off Johnson's briefcase, highlighting the subtle wear patterns that spoke of years navigating courthouse corridors. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, even as Judge Hartley's scrutiny intensified. Very well, Judge Hartley said, though his tone suggested the matter was far from concluded. He glanced again at the citation, then back at Johnson, as if searching for something in the space between the documented facts and the man standing before him. The morning light caught the edge of his judicial badge, sending a brief flash across the courtroom. The scene was set for a decision, but the air in courtroom 302 crackled with unspoken questions. None of the observers could have guessed that this seemingly routine traffic violation was about to transform into a moment that would challenge assumptions and spark change throughout the entire courthouse. Judge Hartley's hand moved toward his gavel with practiced precision, the polished wood catching the late morning light. The courtroom's atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation as he straightened in his chair, his silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. 20 years of experience had taught him to make swift, decisive rulings, and this case seemed to warrant exactly that. Mr. Johnson, he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had become his trademark. While I appreciate your forthrightness regarding this violation, the court cannot simply overlook speeding infractions because of professional obligations. The words echoed slightly in the hushed courtroom, where even the usual shuffling of papers had ceased. Sarah Chen's pen moved silently across her notepad, recording every word with professional efficiency. Yet her eyes occasionally darted between the judge and the defendant, sensing the unusual undercurrent in what should have been a routine proceeding. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the courtroom's wooden panels, as if the day itself was pausing to witness this moment. Taking into account the speed recorded, the clear weather conditions, and your admission to the violation, Judge Hartley continued, his fingers interlaced before him, this court imposes a fine of $400 plus statutory court costs. The amount hung in the air, notably the maximum penalty for the offense. Marcus Johnson's expression remained unchanged, his composure unwavering. His right hand moved slowly toward his briefcase, the movement drawing every eye in the courtroom. The leather surface gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights, its worn edges speaking of countless similar moments in countless other courtrooms. Officer Martinez shifted his weight slightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched Johnson. Something about the defendant's reaction, or rather his lack of reaction, seemed to catch the veteran court officer's attention. Most people showed at least a flicker of dismay at receiving the maximum fine, but Johnson's face remained a study in professional calm. Furthermore, Judge Hartley added, his tone taking on an additional edge of authority, "Let this serve as a reminder that our traffic laws apply equally to everyone, regardless of their professional commitments or scheduling constraints." The words were standard enough, part of his usual lecture, but something about delivering them to Johnson felt different. The wall clock ticked steadily onward as Johnson nodded once, acknowledging the judge's words with a dignity that seemed almost out of place in traffic court. "Yes, Your Honor," he responded, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I understand completely." The words were simple, yet they held a weight that suggested deeper meaning. Sarah Chen paused in her note-taking, her pen hovering above the page as she glanced at Johnson. Something in his tone had caught her attention, a subtle note of understanding that seemed to extend beyond the immediate situation. The morning light streaming through the high windows created a pattern across her desk, highlighting the growing stack of cases yet to be heard. Judge Hartley's fingers drummed once on his desk, a barely perceptible gesture that betrayed a moment of uncertainty. Despite his decades on the bench, something about this interaction felt off-kilter, as if he were missing a crucial piece of information. The routine nature of the proceedings had somehow transformed into something else entirely, though he couldn't quite identify what had changed. The assembled audience watched in silence as Johnson reached into his jacket pocket, the movement deliberate and unhurried. The next few moments would transform this seemingly routine traffic court session into one of the most memorable mornings in Judge Hartley's career, though none of them could have predicted exactly how. The wheels of justice were turning, but they were about to take an unexpected direction that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present in courtroom 302. Time seemed to slow as Marcus Johnson reached for his wallet. The leather folded open with practiced ease, but as he moved to extract his payment, his jacket shifted slightly. The movement revealed a glimpse of something metallic clipped to his belt, a federal identification badge that caught the late morning light and sent a brief flash across the courtroom. Sarah Chen's sharp eyes caught the glint immediately. Her years of experience as a court clerk had taught her to recognize the distinctive shape and style of various law enforcement credentials, and this one was unmistakable. She felt her breath catch as she made out the clear lettering, United States Department of Justice. With swift, precise movements, she grabbed her notepad and began writing. Her pen moved quickly across the paper, the message clear and concise. "Your Honor, the defendant is Marcus Johnson, Senior Federal Prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office." She folded the note with careful creases, each movement deliberate despite her racing thoughts. Officer Martinez had also noticed the badge, his posture shifting subtly as recognition dawned in his eyes. He'd seen Marcus Johnson before, but in a very different context, standing behind the prosecution's table in the federal courthouse downtown, handling some of the most significant cases in the state's recent history. The morning sunlight, streaming through the high windows, seemed to pause, creating a spotlight effect as Sarah approached the bench. Her steps were measured, professional, yet carried an urgency that caught Judge Hartley's attention even before she extended the note. The paper rustled softly as it passed from her hand to his, the sound somehow louder than usual in the hushed courtroom. Johnson continued calmly counting out his fine, seemingly unaware of the silent drama unfolding around him. His movements remained unhurried and dignified, the same quiet confidence that had marked his entire appearance never wavering. The worn edges of his briefcase caught the light, suggesting countless hours spent in courtrooms far more significant than this one. Judge Hartley's eyes moved across the note, then darted back to reread it. His expression remained professionally neutral, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders as the information sank in. Images flashed through his mind. Recent newspaper headlines about the successful prosecution of a complex corruption case, television coverage of a major drug trafficking bust, and most notably, a series of groundbreaking civil rights victories. All of them had featured the same man who now stood before him as a simple traffic violator. The wall clock continued its steady progression, marking each second of this remarkable moment. The morning light had shifted again, creating long shadows that seemed to connect everyone in the room in an intricate pattern of light and shade. The usual background noises of the courthouse, distant footsteps, muffled conversations, the hum of the ventilation system, seemed to fade away. Sarah returned to her desk, her movements deliberately casual, though her mind was racing. She'd been present for countless traffic cases, but none quite like this. The standard script of their morning calendar had transformed into something far more complex, a moment that would likely be remembered and discussed in courthouse circles for years to come. Johnson finally looked up from his wallet, still apparently unaware of the silent revelation that had just occurred. His expression remained composed, professional, carrying the same quiet dignity that had marked his entire appearance in court. The badge at his hip caught the light once more, no longer hidden but still not deliberately displayed, a perfect metaphor for its owner's understated but powerful presence. The courtroom waited in anticipation, though for what, none of them quite knew. The next few moments would reshape not just this morning's proceedings, but potentially the way justice was administered in courtroom 302 for years to come. The wheels of justice had just encountered an unexpected turn, and everyone present could sense the magnitude of the moment, even if they couldn't yet understand its full implications. Judge Hartley's mind raced behind his carefully maintained expression of judicial calm. The morning papers from last week still sat in his office, their headlines now taking on new significance. Federal prosecutor secures landmark victory in Thompson case. The same man from those photographs now stood before his bench, handling a simple traffic fine with remarkable grace. The atmosphere in courtroom 302 had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Even the dust motes dancing in the streams of sunlight seemed to move with greater purpose, as if they too sensed the weight of this moment. The judge's fingers moved to adjust his reading glasses, a habitual gesture that gave him a moment to gather his thoughts. Memories of recent news coverage flashed through his mind. Just 3 months ago, Marcus Johnson had successfully prosecuted one of the most complex public corruption cases in the state's history. The case had required months of careful preparation, countless hours of dedication, and the kind of legal precision that earned respect throughout the judicial community. Sarah Chen busied herself with paperwork, but her occasional glances toward the bench suggested she was keenly aware of the judge's internal struggle. The morning light caught the edge of her desk calendar, where she had recently noted the scheduled press conference about Johnson's latest case, a major breakthrough in civil rights litigation that would affect thousands of lives. Officer Martinez stood at his usual post, his posture reflecting a new understanding of the situation. He had personally witnessed Johnson's skill in the courtroom during a federal trial last year, where the prosecutor's dedication to justice had left a lasting impression on everyone present. The memory of that case cast the current situation in an entirely new light. Judge Hartley found himself reconsidering every word of their earlier exchange. Johnson's calm acceptance of the maximum fine, his professional demeanor, his simple statement about having an important meeting, all of it now carried deeper meaning. The urgent meeting he had mentioned likely involved matters far more significant than typical traffic court proceedings. The wall clock's steady ticking seemed to grow louder in the judge's ears as he processed this revelation. Throughout his career, he had prided himself on treating every case with equal consideration, yet he couldn't deny the subtle assumptions that had colored his handling of this morning's calendar. Johnson's appearance in casual clothing, his late arrival, these surface details had prompted a swift judgment that now felt uncomfortably premature. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the bench and casting long shadows across the judge's papers. The same light that had witnessed countless routine traffic cases now seemed to spotlight this moment of judicial self-reflection. The weight of his robes felt heavier somehow, laden with the responsibility of true impartial justice. Johnson remained standing quietly at the defendant's table, his demeanor unchanged by the silent revelation of his identity. His presence now seemed to fill the courtroom differently, not with authority or pressure, but with a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who truly understood both sides of the judicial system. The remaining cases on the morning calendar suddenly felt distant, as if separated from this moment by a veil of understanding. Judge Hartley had handled thousands of cases over his career, each one supposedly treated with equal consideration. Yet this unexpected encounter forced him to confront the subtle biases that could influence even the most experienced judicial mind. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting to see how this moment would resolve. The simple traffic stop that had brought them all together had transformed into something far more significant, a lesson in humility, judgment, and the constant need for self-examination in the pursuit of justice. As the morning sun continued its journey across the courtroom floor, Judge Hartley faced not just a defendant, but a mirror reflecting the very essence of judicial responsibility. The final moments of Marcus Johnson's appearance in traffic court played out with quiet dignity. He placed 4 crisp $100 bills on the clerk's desk, his movements unhurried and precise. Not once did he mention his position or seek special treatment. Instead, his silent grace spoke volumes about his character and respect for the legal system he served. Sarah Chen processed his payment with professional efficiency, though her hands trembled slightly as she prepared his receipt. She couldn't help but recall the recent judicial conference where Johnson had delivered a compelling keynote speech about equal justice under law. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Here was a man who prosecuted major federal cases, accepting a traffic fine with more dignity than many showed over parking tickets. As Johnson gathered his belongings, the morning sunlight caught his profile one last time. The same face that had appeared on the evening news announcing major indictments now showed no trace of resentment or superiority. His briefcase, worn from years of service to justice, swung gently at his side as he made his way toward the courtroom doors. The remaining defendants watched his departure with curious eyes, unaware of the silent drama that had unfolded before them. Yet something in Johnson's bearing, the straight shoulders, the measured pace, the quiet confidence, left an impression that lingered in the air like the dust motes dancing in the streams of sunlight. Officer Martinez held the door as Johnson exited, their eyes meeting briefly in a moment of professional recognition. The courthouse corridor beyond was already filling with the day's usual traffic of attorneys, clients, and staff, creating a subtle buzz of activity that would soon carry whispers of this morning's events throughout the building. Inside courtroom 302, Judge Hartley called the next case, his voice carrying its usual authority, though perhaps with a softer edge. The morning calendar continued its steady progression, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Each case now received a more measured consideration, as if Johnson's presence had reminded everyone of the weight and significance of even routine judicial proceedings. By lunchtime, the story had begun its journey through the courthouse grapevine. Legal assistants shared it over coffee in the basement cafeteria, clerks discussed it in hurried whispers between hearings, and bailiffs exchanged knowing looks as they passed in the corridors. Yet the tale that spread wasn't one of embarrassment or scandal. Instead, it carried lessons about dignity, professionalism, and the true meaning of justice. Sarah Chen found herself fielding quiet inquiries throughout the afternoon. "Yes, that Marcus Johnson," she would confirm softly, adding, "He paid the full fine without a word of protest." Each retelling seemed to enhance the story's impact, highlighting not the judge's initial assumption, but Johnson's exemplary response to it. The afternoon sun cast different shadows through the courtroom windows as the day progressed. Judge Hartley maintained his usual efficient pace with the calendar, but observers might have noticed subtle changes in his approach. His questions became more measured, his consideration of each case more visibly thorough, as if the morning's events had adjusted the lens through which he viewed his daily duties. The impact rippled beyond courtroom 302. Other judges, hearing the story during their lunch break, found themselves reflecting on their own handling of routine cases. Court staff began approaching their duties with renewed awareness of the dignity inherent in every judicial proceeding, no matter how small. As the day drew to a close, the story of the federal prosecutor's appearance in traffic court had become part of the courthouse's living history, not as a tale of authority challenged or position flaunted, but as a quiet reminder of the principles that underpinned the entire legal system. The golden afternoon light filtered through the courthouse windows, illuminating the steady stream of people leaving for the day, each carrying with them a small piece of the morning's lesson in justice, dignity, and professional grace. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to Courtroom 302. Judge William Hartley arrived each morning before sunrise, taking time to review his calendar with renewed attention. The early morning light would find him at his desk, reading through each case file with the kind of careful consideration that the Marcus Johnson incident had inspired. Sarah Chen noticed the changes first. The judge now paused a fraction longer between cases, his questions more thoughtful, his attention to detail more pronounced. The worn wooden bench that had witnessed thousands of cases now hosted a different kind of justice, one that looked beyond first impressions and surface appearances. One particular morning, 3 weeks after Johnson's appearance, a young woman in waitress uniform rushed into court 15 minutes late, her anxiety visible as she apologized for coming directly from her night shift. Instead of his former swift judgment, Judge Hartley listened patiently to her explanation, his eyes showing understanding rather than disapproval. "The court appreciates your honesty," he said, his voice carrying the new warmth that had become characteristic of his recent proceedings. "And more importantly, your respect for the process by appearing here today despite your work schedule." The woman's relief was palpable, her dignity preserved even as she received her fine. The changes extended beyond individual cases. Judge Hartley had initiated monthly meetings with his court staff, creating an open dialogue about their proceedings. During one such meeting, Officer Martinez shared how defendants seemed more at ease in the courtroom lately, leading to smoother, more respectful proceedings. "It's as if they sense they'll be truly heard," Martinez observed, his years of experience lending weight to his words. The morning sun streaming through the conference room windows caught the silver in his hair as he added, "They're responding to the dignity they're being shown." The judge's reputation began to shift throughout the courthouse. Other judges noticed the increased number of thank you notes from defendants who, despite receiving fines or penalties, expressed appreciation for being treated with respect. Several began to adopt similar approaches in their own courtrooms, creating a ripple effect of positive change throughout the judicial system. One crisp morning, as autumn began painting the courthouse trees in golden hues, Judge Hartley arrived to find a letter on his desk. The return address showed the U.S. Attorney's Office, and inside was a brief note from Marcus Johnson. It didn't mention the traffic citation directly but spoke of the importance of equal justice and the power of dignity in the courtroom. The letter now sat framed on the judge's office wall, a quiet reminder of the lesson that had transformed his approach to justice. Sarah Chen developed a new filing system that included space for noting personal circumstances that might affect court appearances. Sometimes understanding the whole story makes all the difference, she explained during a staff meeting, her innovation reflecting the courtroom's evolved philosophy. The physical appearance of Courtroom 302 remained unchanged. The same sturdy wooden benches, the familiar golden seal behind the bench, the tall windows filtering the morning light. Yet the atmosphere within had transformed. Each case received the kind of attention once reserved for major trials. Each person who entered was seen as an individual worthy of respect. As Judge Hartley prepared for another morning calendar exactly 1 month after Johnson's appearance, he paused to straighten his robes in his chamber mirror. The face that looked back at him was the same, yet somehow different, softened perhaps by newfound wisdom, strengthened by deeper understanding. The lesson from that memorable morning had evolved into something more permanent than a simple story circulating through courthouse corridors. It had become a living principle, a daily reminder that true justice requires not just the application of law, but the recognition of human dignity in every case, no matter how routine. As the judge took his place at the bench, The morning sun illuminated his courtroom just as it had on that transformative day, but now it shone on a different kind of justice, one that would become his enduring legacy.